Case number 1. The afternoon of April 24, 2018, a 72-year-old retired mechanic named Joseph James D'Angelo stepped into the side yard of his home at 8316 Canyon Oak Drive in Citrus Heights, California. He was living there with one of his daughters and a granddaughter. Sacramento County Sheriff's deputies were waiting for him. When they moved in, D'Angelo offered no resistance. He did not run, he did not fight. In a high-pitched voice, he told the officers he had a roast in the oven. They told him they would take care of it. Then they arrested the man who, over a span of 12 years, had committed at least 13 murders, more than 50 rapes, and over 120 burglaries across the state of California. He had been living in that quiet suburb, in the same neighborhood where his first known sexual assaults took place in 1976, for nearly 4 decades. His neighbors thought he was just an angry old man who cursed a lot in his driveway. Joseph James D'Angelo Jr. was born on November 8, 1945, in Bath, New York. He was one of 4 siblings. His family moved to California, and he grew up in the suburbs east of Sacramento, attending Folsom High School and graduating in 1964. He enlisted in the United States Navy and served during the Vietnam War for roughly 22 months, earning a National Defense Service Medal, a Vietnam Service Medal, and a Vietnam Campaign Medal. After his discharge, he enrolled at Sierra College from 1968 to 1970, then transferred to California State University, Sacramento, where he graduated in 1972 with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. In 1973, 2 things happened that would shape everything that followed. D'Angelo married a woman named Sharon Marie Huddle, and he was hired as a police officer by the Exeter Police Department in California's San Joaquin Valley, a small town near Visalia. His colleagues described him as dedicated. A local newspaper profiled him that year and quoted him saying that without law and order, there could be no government, and without a democratic government, there could be no freedom. He said law enforcement was his career, and his job was serving the community. What nobody knew was that within a year of joining the force, D'Angelo began committing crimes in the area he was sworn to protect. Starting in 1974, homes in and around Visalia were hit by a series of break-ins. The burglar struck over and over, at least 120 times over a 20-month period. He stole small items, scattered women's underwear, and killed family dogs. The press called this unknown criminal the Visalia Ransacker. D'Angelo was assigned to the burglary unit at the Exeter Police Department. He was investigating burglaries by day and committing them 11 miles away by night. In September 1975, the Visalia Ransacker attempted to kidnap a teenage girl from her home. Her father, 45-year-old journalism professor Claude Snelling, heard the commotion and ran outside. The intruder shot him twice. Snelling died. His daughter, Elizabeth, was 16 years old. She would later testify in court that the masked man had dragged her out of the house with a gun to her head, and when her father charged out to save her, the intruder killed him and then started kicking her in the head and face before running off. Claude Snelling became D'Angelo's first known murder victim. At the time, nobody connected a police officer from a neighbouring town to the crime. In 1976, D'Angelo transferred to the Auburn Police Department, about 30 miles northeast of Sacramento. The Visalia Ransacker crimes stopped. But almost immediately, a new wave of terror began in the Sacramento area. A masked man was breaking into homes at night, tying up residents and raping women. The attacks happened in middle-class neighborhoods like Carmichael, Citrus Heights, and Rancho Cordova. Investigators called him the East Area Rapist. D'Angelo's methods were careful and calculated. He would stalk his victims for days before striking, learning their schedules and routines. He would sometimes break into a home beforehand to unlock a window or leave rope and twine hidden inside for later use. In the early attacks, he targeted women who lived alone. Then he started going after couples. He would tie up the man, often stacking dishes on his back so he would hear them fall if the husband tried to move. Then he would rape the woman, sometimes for hours, while eating their food and going through their belongings. He stole small personal items, wedding rings, identification, coins, and afterward, he would call his victims on the phone, sometimes years later, just to terrify them again. From 1976 to 1979, D'Angelo committed at least 51 sexual assaults across multiple Northern California counties, including Sacramento, San Joaquin, Contra Costa, and Santa Clara. He was a serving police officer for most of this period. One victim's impact statement, read at his sentencing decades later, revealed that D'Angelo had actually been on duty as an Auburn police officer the night he attacked them. He had parked his patrol car in a church parking lot and walked to the victim's house on foot. On February 2nd, 1978, a young couple named Brian Maggiore, 21, and Katie Maggiore, 20, were walking their dog in their Rancho Cordova neighborhood. They were shot and killed. These were the East Area Rapists' second and third known murder victims. D'Angelo's career in law enforcement ended on July 2nd, 1979. He was caught shoplifting a hammer and a can of dog repellent from a store in Citrus Heights. He was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 6 months of probation and a $100 fine. The Auburn Police Department fired him. He never worked in law enforcement again, but the crimes did not stop. They got worse. After his firing, D'Angelo's attacks shifted to Southern California. He stopped leaving survivors. In Santa Barbara, Ventura, and Orange counties, a killer the press called the original Night Stalker was breaking into homes and murdering couples. He bludgeoned and strangled his victims. Between 1979 and 1986, he killed at least 10 more people. His victims included Deborah Manning and Robert Offerman, shot in their Goleta home in December 1979. Charlene and Lyman Smith, murdered in Ventura in March 1980. Keith and Patrice Harrington, killed in their Dana Point home in August 1980. Manuela Vithoon, raped and murdered in Irvine in February 1981. And his last known victim, 18-year-old Janelle Cruz, raped and bludgeoned to death in her Irvine home on May 5, 1986. Then the attacks stopped completely. D'Angelo disappeared into ordinary life. He had been working as a truck mechanic at a distribution center for Save Mart supermarkets in Roseville since 1989. He worked there for 27 years, retiring in 2017. A co-worker later described him as a regular guy who never smiled. He lived in the house on Canyon Oak Drive in Citrus Heights with his wife and 3 daughters. The couple separated in 1991, though they did not officially divorce until after his arrest. His eldest daughter later said he had been a perfect father. His wife said she believed his excuses for being away from home. None of them ever suspected he was the most prolific serial criminal in California history. For decades, the case went cold, but the evidence left behind was waiting. In 2001, DNA testing confirmed what some investigators had suspected. The East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same person. The crimes were linked across the state, but no suspect had ever been identified. In 2013, crime writer Michelle McNamara began investigating the case and coined the name Golden State Killer. Her book, published after her death in 2016, brought the case massive public attention. That same year, the FBI offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to the killer's capture. The breakthrough came through a method that had never been used before in a public criminal case. In December 2017, investigators led by Detective Paul Holes and FBI lawyer Steve Kramer uploaded the killer's DNA profile from a Ventura County crime scene to GEDmatch, a free public genealogy website. The database identified between 10 and 20 distant relatives who shared common ancestors with the unknown killer. Genealogist Barbara Ray Venter built a massive family tree from those matches, going back generations. From that tree, investigators narrowed it down to 2 suspects. One was ruled out through a relative's DNA test. That left Joseph James D'Angelo. Starting on March 18, 2018, the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department began following D'Angelo. They watched him for weeks. They collected DNA from the handle of his car door and from a tissue found in his curbside trash can. Both samples matched the DNA from the Golden State Killer crime scenes. On April 24th, they moved in. D'Angelo was booked into the Sacramento County main jail. In the interrogation room, alone and unaware he was being recorded, he began talking to himself. Sacramento County Prosecutor Thien Ho later described watching the footage. D'Angelo muttered about a figure named Jerry who had made him do things. He said he had pushed Jerry out and tried to have a happy life. Then he said, plainly, "I did all those things. I destroyed all their lives, so now I've got to pay the price." Prosecutors believe this was either manipulation or an attempt to build an insanity defense. After being confronted with the charges, D'Angelo ran his head into the interrogation room wall. He was moved to a monitored cell. D'Angelo was charged with 13 counts of first-degree murder and 13 counts of kidnapping. Because of California's statute of limitations on rape cases that occurred before 2017, none of the sexual assaults from the 1970s could be formally charged. On June 29, 2020, in a Sacramento State University ballroom converted into a courtroom during the COVID-19 pandemic, D'Angelo pleaded guilty. He admitted responsibility for 161 crimes involving 48 victims, including murders, kidnappings, rapes, burglaries, and criminal threats across 11 California counties. The plea deal took the death penalty off the table. From August 18th to August 20th, 2020, over 3 days, survivors and victims' family members confronted D'Angelo in court. Jane Carson Sandler, who was raped in 1976 while in bed with her 3-year-old son, told the court she had been frozen in fear beyond description and that her attention during the attack was not on the rape, but on where D'Angelo had put her child. Phyllis Henneman, raped in the first known attack in June 1976, had her sister read a statement calling D'Angelo the devil incarnate. Chris Pedretti, who was 15 years old when D'Angelo raped her on a December night in 1976, while she was home alone playing the piano, said she had struggled for 41 years with panic attacks, failed relationships, and frequent job changes. Elizabeth Hupp, whose father Claude Snelling was shot and killed in front of her in 1975, told the court how D'Angelo had dragged her from the house at gunpoint, and she had believed she was going to die. One of the most powerful moments came when Carson Sandler brought Bonnie Olson to the podium. Bonnie was D'Angelo's ex-fiancée from the early 1970s. She was the woman whose name, Bonnie, D'Angelo had screamed during some of his rapes. When Bonnie stepped into the courtroom and stared at D'Angelo, prosecutor Thien Ho, sitting 6 feet away, watched the defendant closely. D'Angelo, who had spent the entire proceedings sitting motionless in a wheelchair, staring straight ahead, not reacting to anything, stopped breathing. For a man whose entire criminal identity was built on control, the woman who had left him was the one person who could still take it away. On August 21st, 2020, Judge Michael Bowman sentenced Joseph James D'Angelo to 11 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional life sentence and 8 more years. It was the maximum sentence the law allowed. Before the sentence was read, D'Angelo rose from his wheelchair, removed his white face mask, and spoke. He said he had listened to every statement. He said he was truly sorry to everyone he had hurt. D'Angelo is currently serving his sentence in a protected unit within the California state prison system. According to prosecutor Thien Ho, who checked on his status years after the sentencing, D'Angelo's health is fine and he has a prison job. He is kept in a protected unit because of the nature of his crimes. He will never be released. The case changed law enforcement permanently. D'Angelo was the first person publicly arrested through investigative genetic genealogy. Since his capture, the same technique has been used to solve dozens of cold cases across the country. Sacramento District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert said on the day after the arrest that they had found the needle in the haystack, and it had been right there in Sacramento the entire time. For over 40 years, the man who terrorized an entire state had been living in the same suburb where his reign began, mowing his lawn, raising his daughters, and retiring quietly, while his victims lived with what he had done to them every single day. 13 people never came home. More than 50 women carried the weight of what happened to them for decades, and the man responsible was a police officer who had once told a local newspaper that his job was serving the community. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Moving on to case number 2. Case number 2. Gerard John Schaefer was born on March 26, 1946 in Neenah, Wisconsin, the eldest of 3 children born to Gerard Sr. and Doris Schaefer. His father was a travelling salesman and an alcoholic who was frequently absent from the household. When he was home, he was verbally abusive to his wife and children. Young Gerard believed his father favoured his sister over him and his brother. He later described his childhood as troubled and turbulent. The family moved from Wisconsin to Nashville, Tennessee, then to Atlanta, Georgia, where Gerard attended Marist Academy, a Catholic school. In 1960, when he was 14 years old, the family settled permanently in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He enrolled at St. Thomas Aquinas High School and graduated in 1964. By the time the Schaefers reached Fort Lauderdale, something was already deeply wrong with their eldest son. According to statements Schaefer later made to psychiatrists, his problems began around the age of 12. He developed an obsession with women's underwear and began stealing it from neighbours. He became a peeping Tom, spying on a girl named Lee Hainline who lived next door. He killed animals for pleasure, hunting in the Everglades and shooting creatures that could not be consumed. He tied himself to trees and found it sexually arousing. He told psychiatrist Dr. Mordecai Haber that around this same age, he began fantasizing about hurting women. In 1966, he sought psychiatric help for his violent sexual thoughts and what he described as voices telling him to kill. The therapy did not work. After high school, Schaefer pursued several careers and failed at all of them. He attended Broward Community College and later transferred to Florida Atlantic University. He considered the priesthood, but was rejected by a seminary. According to Schaefer, they told him he did not have enough faith. He then decided to become a high school teacher so he could instill what he called American values in young people. In 1969, he got a student teaching position at Plantation High School in Fort Lauderdale. He was fired almost immediately. The principal described his behavior as totally inappropriate. His teaching supervisor, Richard Goodhart, later recalled telling Schaefer that he should never try to get a job with authority over other people, or Goodhart would do everything he could to prevent it. In December 1968, Schaefer had married a woman named Martha Fogg, a fellow Florida Atlantic University student. The marriage quickly fell apart. Martha filed for divorce in May 1970, citing extreme cruelty. After the divorce, Schaefer traveled to Europe and North Africa for several weeks, before returning to Florida with a new plan. If he could not be a priest or a teacher, he would become a police officer. He applied to the Broward County Sheriff's Office and was rejected after failing a psychological test. He then applied to the Wilton Manors Police Department, a small department in a Fort Lauderdale suburb, and was hired in September 1971. He was 25 years old. His time there was brief and alarming. His supervisors quickly noticed that Schaefer was stopping cars driven by women so he could get their personal information. According to the Wilton Manors police chief at the time, Bernard Scott, Schaefer used poor judgment and did dumb things. He was let go within months. But despite being rejected by one agency and fired from another, Schaefer managed to get hired by the Martin County Sheriff's Office in June 1972. He got the job partly through a glowing letter of recommendation from his former boss at Wilton Manors. Martin County later discovered that letter had been forged. Sheriff Richard Crowder gave Schaefer a badge, a gun, and a patrol car. For a man with violent fantasies about abducting women, it was the most dangerous combination imaginable, and it took only weeks for those fantasies to become real. On July 21, 1972, Schaefer was on patrol when he spotted two teenage girls hitchhiking near the beach. Nancy Trotter was 18 years old. Pamela Wells was 17. Schaefer pulled over and told them that hitchhiking was illegal in the county. It was not. He radioed his station and said he had two girls, then asked if it was okay to drive them home. The station said yes. He drove the girls to their apartment, but the next day he returned. He offered to drive them to the beach. Instead, he drove them into a remote, wooded area, pulled a gun, and forced them out of the car. He tied them to trees with ropes and put nooses around their necks. He told them he was going to kill them or sell them into prostitution. Then his police radio crackled. He had been called back to the station. He left the girls tied up in the woods, promising he would return. Trotter and Wells did something that likely saved their lives. They worked their way free of the ropes and ran. They went straight to the nearest police station, which happened to be the very station where their kidnapper worked. When Schaefer returned to the woods and found his victims gone, he called Sheriff Crowder. His exact words, according to published reports, were, "I've done something foolish. You're going to be mad at me." He told his boss he had been trying to teach the girls a lesson about the dangers of hitchhiking and had overdone it. Crowder did not believe him. He fired Schaefer immediately and filed charges for false imprisonment and aggravated assault. Schaefer was arrested, but the legal system moved slowly. He pleaded guilty to one count of aggravated assault in a plea deal. He was sentenced to 1 year in jail. But his formal sentencing was delayed until after the holidays, and he did not begin serving his time until January 15th, 1973. That meant Schaefer was free on $15,000 bail from late July 1972 through mid-January 1973, roughly 6 months during which he was a known danger walking the streets of South Florida. He used that freedom to kill. On September 27, 1972, 2 months after the Trotter and Wells incident, 17-year-old Susan Place and 16-year-old Georgia Jessup disappeared from Fort Lauderdale. Both girls had met a man at an adult education center who introduced himself as Jerry Shepard. He told them he was from Colorado. Susan's mother, Lucille Place, had met this man when he came to their house to pick up the girls. She was suspicious. She wrote down the license plate number of his blue-green Datsun. The girls said they were going to the beach to play guitar. They never came home. Lucille Place made an error copying the license plate. She wrote down the county prefix as 4, which was Pinellas County, instead of 42, which was Martin County. 6 months passed before the mistake was caught, but eventually, in March 1973, the plate was traced back to Gerard Schaefer, who by that time was already sitting in jail for the assault on Trotter and Wells. When confronted, Schaefer denied ever having met Susan Place or Georgia Jessup. On April 1, 1973, 3 men collecting aluminium cans on Hutchinson Island near Fort Pierce found human remains in a wooded area near Blind Creek. 4 days later, on April 5th, the victims were identified through dental records as Susan Place and Georgia Jessup. They had been bound to trees, tortured, mutilated, and decapitated. Susan had been shot in the jaw. The crime scene made clear that the girls had endured something horrific before they died. When police searched a locked bedroom in the Fort Lauderdale home of Schaefer's mother, what they found inside was staggering. There were over 100 pages of handwritten and typed stories that Schaefer had written over several years, filled with detailed descriptions of kidnapping, rape, torture, and murder of young women. There were crude drawings to go with the stories. The women in the stories were referred to as whores, sluts, and harlots. There were also personal items that did not belong to Schaefer or his family. A purse owned by Susan Place, 3 pieces of jewellery belonging to 25-year-old Lee Hainline Bonadies, the neighbour girl Schaefer had spied on as a teenager, who had vanished in September 1969. Her skull, with multiple bullet holes, would be found at a construction site in Palm Beach County in 1978. 2 teeth and a shamrock pin belonging to 22-year-old Carmen Hallock, who had disappeared in December 1969. An address book belonging to 22-year-old Belinda Hutchins, missing since January 1972. A passport, diary, and book of poetry owned by 19-year-old Colette Goodenough, who disappeared in January 1973. The driver's license of 19-year-old Barbara Wilcox, who had vanished with Goodenough. A piece of jewellery belonging to 14-year-old Mary Briscolina, who had gone missing along with 13-year-old Elsie Farmer in October 1972. Their decapitated bodies had been found buried separately by construction workers in January and February 1973. In total, the trunk and bedroom contained personal belongings tied to at least 8 missing or murdered women and girls. Prosecutor Robert Stone charged Schaefer with 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Susan Place and Georgia Jessup. Stone told reporters the case might represent the greatest crime in the history of the United States. When charged, Schaefer said, "I'm sick, and I hope to God you can help me." The trial began on September 17, 1973, before Judge C. Pfeiffer Trowbridge in St. Lucie County. 4 psychiatrists had examined Schaefer and agreed he was legally sane and fit for trial. Nancy Trotter and Pamela Wells, the 2 teenagers who had escaped from Schaefer in July 1972, testified for the prosecution. They told the jury exactly what Schaefer had done: the ropes, the trees, the nooses, the threats to kill them. Lucille Place testified about the last night she saw her daughter alive, leaving the house with the man who called himself Jerry Shepard. 3 witnesses testified for the defence, claiming Schaefer was homesick in bed the night Place and Jessup disappeared. The jury did not believe them. After 5 hours and 10 minutes of deliberation, they returned a guilty verdict on both counts of first-degree murder. Because the Supreme Court of Florida had declared capital punishment unconstitutional at the time of the murders, Schaefer could not be sentenced to death. On October 3, 1973, he was sentenced to 2 concurrent terms of life imprisonment. In a detail that seemed almost unbelievable, Schaefer's defense attorney, Elton Schwartz, married Schaefer's second wife, Teresa Dean, on December 21, 1973, less than 3 months after the conviction. Schaefer was sent to Florida State Prison. He never stopped claiming he was innocent. Over the next 22 years, he filed approximately 20 appeals. Every single one was rejected. He also filed lawsuits against anyone who called him a serial killer in print, suing true crime authors Colin Wilson, Michael Newton, Patrick Kendrick, and former FBI agent Robert Ressler. All of those lawsuits were dismissed. In one case, a judge officially branded Schaefer a serial killer, finding him undeniably linked to murders beyond the two for which he was convicted. But while Schaefer fought his conviction publicly, he was telling a very different story privately. In letters to his former high school girlfriend, Sondra London, he boasted about killing far more than 2 people. London published a collection of his stories and drawings in 1990 under the title Killer Fiction. The stories featured graphic descriptions of the torture, rape, and murder of young women, often written from the perspective of a rogue police officer. Schaefer insisted they were fiction. Investigators believed they were descriptions of real crimes. In one letter, dated April 1991, Schaefer wrote that his personal count ran between 80 and 110 victims across 8 years and 3 continents. Most investigators considered this an exaggeration, but the consensus among law enforcement, including former FBI agent Bill Haggerty, was that Schaefer's real body count was well above the 2 he was convicted of. Haggerty called Schaefer one of the 5 sickest serial killers he had ever encountered. London and Schaefer were briefly engaged in 1991. She broke it off and began a relationship with Danny Rolling, another Florida serial killer. Schaefer responded with death threats. He claimed to have connections to the Dixie Mafia and the Ku Klux Klan, who would do his bidding. None of it was true. Inside the prison, Schaefer was despised. He had a reputation as an informant and had been attacked by other inmates multiple times. On December 3, 1995, a fellow inmate named Vincent Rivera entered Schaefer's cell at Florida State Prison. Rivera slit Schaefer's throat and stabbed him dozens of times, focusing on his eyes. Gerard John Schaefer was 49 years old. Rivera was convicted of the killing in 1999 and had 53 years and 10 months added to the life plus 20 years sentence he was already serving for a double murder. He never gave a public motive for the killing. Retired Circuit Judge C. Pfeiffer Trowbridge, the same judge who had sentenced Schaefer 22 years earlier, told reporters after learning of the prison killing that Schaefer had finally gotten the death sentence he ultimately deserved but could not be given. Georgia Jessup's mother, Shirley Jessup, was more direct. She told reporters she wanted to send a present to the man who killed him. At the time of Schaefer's death, a Fort Lauderdale homicide detective named John Curcio had been working to file charges against Schaefer for 3 additional unsolved murders, those of Lee Hainline Benades, Carmen Hallock, and Belinda Hutchins, to make sure he never got out of prison. All 3 women had personal ties to Schaefer. All 3 had belongings found in his mother's home. But Schaefer's death meant those charges would never be filed, and the full truth of what he had done died with him in that cell. Gerard John Schaefer was convicted of murdering 2 teenage girls. Investigators believe his real victim count was far higher. He was rejected by a seminary, fired from teaching, fired from one police department, rejected by another, and still managed to get hired as a sheriff's deputy through a forged letter of recommendation. Every system that should have stopped him failed. And for the women and girls whose jewellery and teeth and diaries were found locked in a bedroom at his mother's house, that failure was permanent. Many of their bodies have never been found. Their families never got answers. The man who could have given those answers spent his final years in a prison cell, writing stories about what he had done and insisting every word of it was fiction. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Moving on to case number 3. Case number 3. Antoinette Renee Frank was born on April 30th, 1971, in Opelousas, Louisiana, one of 4 children born to Adam and Mary Ann Frank. Her father, Adam, was a Vietnam veteran who worked for a telephone company. He was also a violent and abusive man. Louisiana Department of Veterans Affairs records confirmed that Adam Frank was physically and emotionally abusive toward his children. According to those records, he once strangled Antoinette when she was just 2 years old. Antoinette later told psychologists that her father began sexually abusing her when she reached puberty and forced her to have 3 abortions between the ages of 16 and 20. A fellow police recruit would later say that Frank and her father interacted as if they were lovers, and that Frank sat in her father's lap at social events even as an adult. Her mother eventually took 3 of the 4 children and left. Antoinette was the one left behind. Despite the chaos of her home life, Frank held on to one dream from childhood. She wanted to be a police officer. As a teenager, she served as a junior police officer for the Opelousas Police Department. When the family briefly relocated to the eastern part of New Orleans, she joined the New Orleans Police Explorers. It was, by every account, the only thing she ever consistently wanted to do with her life. After graduating high school in May 1989, Frank moved to New Orleans on her own and found work at a Walmart. She was fired after 6 months for giving false information on her application. She got rehired at a different Walmart location and waited until she turned 20, the minimum age to apply for the New Orleans Police Department. On April 30th, 1991, her 20th birthday, she submitted her application. It did not go well. The application process turned up lie after lie. Frank had lied about being fired from Walmart. She scored poorly on 2 standardized psychological evaluations. The department psychiatrist, Dr. Philip Scaria, evaluated Frank on 14 characteristics relevant to police work and rated her as unacceptable or below average in most of them. He described her as shallow and superficial and advised, in clear terms, that the NOPD should not hire her. By any reasonable measure, Antoinette Frank should never have been given a badge. But in 1993, the New Orleans Police Department was in crisis. The agency was losing roughly 100 officers a year, many of them fired or arrested, and was only hiring about half that many to replace them. In 1994, New Orleans would become the murder capital of the United States. 2 officers were arrested for murder that year. In December 1994, the FBI arrested 10 NOPD officers on federal drug trafficking charges. The department was desperate for bodies. It also had an unofficial goal of adding more African American officers to the force to ease racial tensions in the majority black city. Frank, a black woman, fit the profile they were looking for. She was hired on February 7, 1993, and graduated from the police academy on February 28th. She reportedly graduated near the top of her class, but once she was actually on the streets, her colleagues quickly noticed problems. Other officers described her as excessively shy, lacking the decisiveness needed for the job, and occasionally irrational. The consensus was that she needed more training. Still, she was assigned to the 7th District, covering New Orleans East. In June 1992, before she was officially hired, Frank had moved into a house in New Orleans with her father, Adam. While she was at the police academy, her father reported her missing after finding a note in which she described herself as doomed since the day she was born. She returned the next day. Less than 3 weeks later, the department hired her anyway. At some point in 1993, roughly a year and a half before the murders that would make her infamous, Frank reported her father missing. He was never seen alive again. On November 25, 1994, Frank responded to a shooting while on patrol. One of the victims was an 18-year-old drug dealer named Roger Joseph Lacaze. He had been shot during a drug deal gone bad. His friend, Nehemiah Miller, died from his injuries. Lacaze survived. Frank took his statement and began visiting him in the hospital and at home. What began as what Frank later called an attempt to turn his life around quickly became something else entirely. She bought Lacaze a cell phone, expensive clothes, and a pager. She rented him a Cadillac. She started driving him around in her patrol car and introduced him to other officers as her trainee. 2 officers from the 7th District once saw Lacaze driving Frank's police car. Other officers witnessed him moving her marked police unit at accident scenes she was investigating. Lacaze was a high school dropout with a history of drug dealing and violence. He stood 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 135 pounds. He had gold teeth and an attitude that frightened people. His own mother had kicked him out of the house when he was 17 because of his drug dealing. Frank, who was 6 years older and carried a badge and a gun, was infatuated with him. Frank had been working a part-time off-duty security detail at the Kim An restaurant, a Vietnamese restaurant on Bullard Avenue in New Orleans East. The restaurant was owned by the Vu family. Bic Vu had immigrated from Vietnam to the United States in 1981. His wife, Nguyet Nguyen, and their children followed in 1991. By 1995, their 4 children were all working at the restaurant: Ha, 24, Chow, 23, Kwok, 18, and Kwong, 17. Ha was considering becoming a nun. Kyong was an altar boy at St. Bridget Catholic Church, played high school football, and wanted to become a priest. Both worked long hours in their parents' kitchen. The other off-duty officer working security at the Kim An was 25-year-old Ronald Austin Williams II. Williams had joined the NOPD in 1991 and was a married father of 2 sons, Christopher and Patrick. His youngest son was born just 1 week before the night that would take his father's life. Williams and Frank worked the same shift in the same district. They were sometimes paired as partners. The Vu family considered Williams a member of their family. In the weeks before the robbery, Frank and Lacaze hatched a plan. Frank knew the Vu family kept large amounts of cash at the restaurant because they did not fully trust banks. She knew the layout, the closing routines, and the security setup. She acquired a 9mm pistol from the NOPD evidence room. 2 weeks before the murders, she reported the gun stolen. Lacaze later told detectives the report was fake. The gun had never been stolen. On the evening of March 3rd, 1995, the night before the robbery, Frank stopped at a Walmart to buy a box of 9mm ammunition. She was on the clock, wearing her uniform and driving a patrol car. Lacaze was with her. Late on the night of March 3rd and into the early morning of March 4th, 1995, Frank and Lacaze visited the Kim Ann restaurant twice. They ordered food. The Vu family served them. Ha cooked Frank dinner. During one of these visits, Frank stole a key to the front door. After midnight, the restaurant closed. Chow Vu went into the kitchen to count the night's money and then came into the dining room to pay Officer Williams. That is when she noticed Frank approaching the restaurant again, for a 3rd time. Chow felt something was wrong. She told Williams not to open the door, but the door opened. Frank and Lacaze entered the restaurant. Lacaze came up behind Officer Ronald Williams and shot him. Williams was hit with 3 gunshots, including wounds to the back of the head, the neck, and the back. He fell face down behind the bar. When the shooting started, Chow Vu and her 18-year-old brother Kwok ran to the restaurant's walk-in cooler and hid inside. They slammed the door and turned off the lights. Through the glass doors of the cooler and a window overlooking the kitchen, they caught glimpses of Frank and Lacaze as they searched the restaurant. Frank cornered Ha and Kwong Vu in the kitchen. The 2 siblings were on their knees. They begged for their lives. Kong told Frank where the money was. Frank fired 9 rounds into them. Ha Vu, 24 years old, died instantly. When detectives found her body, she was still on her knees, her forehead resting on the floor. Kwong Vu, 17 years old, did not die right away. Frank shot him repeatedly in the chest and back, but his young heart kept beating. She heard him trying to speak, so she shot him again, 2 bullets into his head. Frank and Lacaze took the money and fled in Frank's battered 1977 Ford Torino. Lacaze had also taken Officer Williams's gun and his wallet. After dropping Lacaze off at an apartment complex, Frank drove to the 7th District Police Station. Meanwhile, Chow and Kwok Vu came out of the cooler. Chow found the bodies of her sister and brother in the kitchen, then discovered Officer Williams lying in a pool of blood in the dining room. Frank had taken the restaurant's phone, so Chow grabbed her purse from the bar and used her mobile phone. She called a friend at 1:48 a.m. and told him to call police, saying the police officer was killed. Kwok ran out of the restaurant to a friend's house and called 911 at 1:50 a.m. He told the operator, clearly and specifically, that a police officer named Antoinette and a man had come into the restaurant and started shooting everyone inside. Frank heard the 911 call over her police radio. She grabbed a marked patrol car from the station and drove back to the Kim Ann as the first responding officer. She parked in the rear lot, entered through the back, and pretended she had nothing to do with it. When she found Chow Vu inside, she asked what had happened. Chow looked at her and said, "You saw what happened. You killed my brother and sister." Other officers arrived. Chow told Detective Karen Favre that someone named Antoinette and a short black male with gold teeth had committed the murders. When Favre asked who Antoinette was, Chow pointed directly at Frank. Homicide detectives Eddie Rance and Marco Demmer arrived 30 minutes later to question Frank. Her story kept changing. She first denied being present, then she said she had been there as a customer and helped employees escape through the back door. Rance pointed out that the back door was locked from the inside. Confronted with this fact, Frank implicated Lacaze. Officers found a .38 caliber revolver on Frank, even though she had told them she was unarmed. At the police station, Frank confessed. She admitted to shooting Ha and Kwong Vu in the kitchen, but blamed Lacaze for killing Officer Williams. She said the robbery was all Lacaze's idea, and that she just went along with it because she did not know what else to do. Ballistic evidence later showed the same 9mm pistol was used to kill all 3 victims. Lacaze was arrested hours later at his brother's apartment in Gretna. Detectives tracked him down, partly because, roughly 45 minutes after leaving the restaurant with a dead police officer's wallet, he had used Officer Williams's Chevron credit card to buy $15 worth of gas at a station 3 blocks from his brother's apartment. Frank and Lacaze were indicted by an Orleans Parish grand jury on April 28, 1995. Their trials were severed. Lacaze went first, tried July 17 through 21, 1995, before Judge Frank Marullo. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. Frank's trial began on September 5, 1995, also before Judge Marullo. Her defense attorneys had subpoenaed 39 witnesses. They did not call a single one. They apparently believed it was enough to argue that the prosecution had not proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt. On September 12, 1995, the jury needed only 22 minutes to find Frank guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. At the time, it was a record for a capital murder case in New Orleans. The next day, the same jury took just 45 minutes to recommend the death penalty. She was formally sentenced to death on October 20, 1995, and sent to death row at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in St. Gabriel, near Baton Rouge. 1 month after Frank received her death sentence, a dog led police to human remains buried under her house, the same house she had shared with her father before reporting him missing in 1993. The remains included a skull with a bullet hole in it. Experts determined the bones belonged to a man approximately the same age as Adam Frank. Police and prosecutors believe Antoinette murdered her own father. Because she was already on death row, no effort was made to charge her with his death. In a letter from prison, Roger Lacaze offered his own assessment of his former partner. He wrote, "Antoinette is crazy. She killed her own dad and buried him under her house." In 2007, the Louisiana Supreme Court ruled that Frank had been properly sentenced to die. She was denied clemency by the State Pardon Board in 2023. As of 2025, she remains on death row at St. Gabriel, the only woman on Louisiana's death row. Lacaze's death sentence was overturned in 2015 due to a finding that one of his jurors was a commissioned law enforcement officer who was legally barred from jury service and had concealed that fact. He was resentenced to life imprisonment in December 2019. Officer Ronald Williams was buried at Lake Lawn Metairie Cemetery on March 7, 1995. His name was inscribed on the memorial wall at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Washington, D.C. His wife, Mary Williams, raised their 2 sons alone. She grew close to the Vu family in the years that followed. They see each other often. Homicide detective Eddie Rance, who worked the case, retired after 27 years on the job and went to law school. He still thinks about the case. He described Frank as, without a doubt, the most cold-hearted person he ever met. Prosecutor Glenn Woods keeps a photograph of Ha and Quong Vu in his office. He said it reminds him of the evil that exists in the world. Ha Vu was 24 years old and wanted to be a nun. Quong Vu was 17 years old and wanted to be a priest. They spent their last moments on their knees on the kitchen floor of their parents' restaurant, and the woman standing over them with a gun was the same woman their family had trusted to keep them safe. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Moving on to case number 4. Case number 4. Daniel Ken Holtzclaw was born on December 10, 1986, in the United States territory of Guam. His father, Eric Holtzclaw, was a white American who served as a police officer with the Enid Police Department in Oklahoma, eventually rising to the rank of lieutenant over a 25-year career. His mother, Kumiko Holtzclaw, was Japanese. The family settled in Enid, Oklahoma, a small city about 70 miles north of Oklahoma City. Daniel grew up there, and from the outside, his life looked like one long string of accomplishments. He attended Enid High School, where he became a standout football player. As a linebacker, he set a school record with 25 tackles in a single game and earned first-team All-State honors as a senior. After graduating in 2005, he played linebacker at Eastern Michigan University, where he earned a degree in criminal justice. When he graduated in 2010, he tried to get drafted into the NFL. It did not happen, so he followed his father into law enforcement. Holtzclaw was hired by the Oklahoma City Police Department on September 16, 2011. He completed the department's Field Training Officer program by August 2012 and was assigned to patrol the Spring Lake Division, an area covering parts of northeast Oklahoma City. It was a neighborhood known for high crime rates, drug trafficking, and prostitution. Many of the residents were black and low income. Holtzclaw passed his probationary period in April 2013 with no documented disciplinary issues. He briefly transferred to the Gang Enforcement Unit before returning to patrol. Colleagues and supervisors described him as a competent officer. His defense attorney would later call him a model officer. But between at least December 2013 and June 2014, Daniel Holtzclaw used his badge, his gun, and his authority to sexually assault women on his beat. According to prosecutors, he was methodical about it. He targeted black women from the poorest parts of his patrol area. He ran their names through police databases, looking for outstanding warrants, drug arrests, or other criminal records. He chose women whose backgrounds, he believed, would make them unlikely to be believed if they ever reported him. Then he stopped them, during traffic stops, on the street, at their homes, and used the threat of arrest to force them into sexual acts. The assaults followed a pattern. Holtzclaw would pull a woman over or approach her on foot. He would search her, sometimes asking her to lift her shirt or pull down her pants, under the guise of looking for drugs. He would mention her warrants or prior arrests, and make it clear that he could take her to jail. Then the encounters would escalate, to groping, to forced exposure, to oral sodomy, to rape. He did this while wearing his uniform, carrying his weapon, and driving his patrol car. He did it late at night, in isolated locations, to women who were alone. The earliest known incident dated back to December 20th, 2013. A woman said Holtzclaw arrested her for drug possession, took her to a hospital, and forced her to perform oral sex while she was handcuffed to her hospital bed. She said he led her to believe she would be released if she complied. She later testified that she did not come forward because she did not believe anyone would believe her over a police officer. In May 2014, another woman reported that a police officer had stopped her, driven her to an isolated area, and forced her to perform oral sex. A report was filed, but no action was taken at that time. The woman's account sat in the system, unconnected to anything else, until the night everything changed. That night came on June 18, 2014, at around 2 a.m. Holtzclaw had already finished his shift. He was driving his assigned patrol car home through northeast Oklahoma City when he pulled over a car on Lincoln Street. He did not report the stop to police dispatch. He did not run a records check on the driver. He had already logged off his patrol car computer. The driver was a 57-year-old grandmother named Jannie Liggins. She was driving home after playing dominoes with a friend. Unlike the other women Holtzclaw had targeted, Liggins had no criminal record. She was not poor. She was not vulnerable in the ways Holtzclaw had counted on. Holtzclaw told Liggins she had been swerving, which she denied. He directed her to the back seat of his patrol car. He shined a flashlight on her chest. He told her to pull down her pants. He forced her to expose herself, and then forced her to perform oral sex on him. Liggins later said she begged him to stop. She said all she could think about was the gun in the holster on his right side. She believed he was going to kill her. When it was over, Liggins picked up her daughter and drove straight to a police station. She filed a report that same night. She also contacted a local television station. The detective who took her statement at the hospital believed her immediately. According to Liggins, the detective told her she already had a good idea who had done it. The investigation moved quickly after that. Detectives Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory from the Sex Crimes Unit pulled Holtzclaw aside the next afternoon when he reported for his shift. They drove him to the unit for a 2-hour interrogation. Holtzclaw denied everything. Detectives took DNA swabs and seized his uniform, including his pants. When forensic analysts examined the fly area of his uniform pants, they found DNA from multiple individuals, including a match to a 17-year-old girl who would later testify that Holtzclaw had sexually assaulted her on her mother's front porch. The detectives then went back through Holtzclaw's recorded history. They reviewed his database searches, his GPS data from the automatic vehicle locator on his patrol car, and surveillance footage from nearby businesses. They cross-referenced the names he had searched with reports of assaults. They found the May 2014 report that had gone nowhere, and realised the route the victim described matched Holtzclaw's GPS trail that night exactly. They began contacting women whose names Holtzclaw had run through the system. One by one, the stories came out. Holtzclaw was placed on paid administrative leave and arrested on August 21, 2014. He was initially charged with 16 counts, which eventually grew to 36 counts, involving 13 victims. The charges included first-degree rape, second-degree rape, forcible oral sodomy, sexual battery, indecent exposure, procuring lewd exhibition, stalking, and burglary. All 13 victims were black women. Their ages ranged from 17 to 57. Several had criminal records. Several had histories of drug use or prostitution. Prosecutors argued this was precisely why Holtzclaw had chosen them. Holtzclaw pleaded not guilty to all charges. His trial began on November 2, 2015, at the Oklahoma County Courthouse. The courtroom was nearly empty on the first day. The case had received relatively little national attention compared to other police misconduct cases, something activists attributed to the race and economic status of the victims. OKC Artists for Justice, a local advocacy group, was founded to organize support for the women. The hashtag Daniel Holtzclaw began trending as the trial progressed. The final jury was all white, 8 men and 4 women. 3 black men had been in the initial jury pool, but were all eventually rejected. The president of the Oklahoma City chapter of the NAACP said he was watching to see if justice would truly be served. During the month-long trial, all 13 women testified against Holtzclaw. They described being stopped, searched, threatened with arrest, and sexually assaulted by a uniformed officer with a badge and a gun. Holtzclaw's defense attorney, Scott Adams, attacked the credibility of the accusers, focusing on their criminal records, drug use, and involvement in prostitution. The defense called only one witness, a former girlfriend of Holtzclaw's, who testified that he had never exhibited sexually aggressive behavior around her. Holtzclaw did not take the stand. On December 10, 2015, his 29th birthday, the jury returned its verdict after more than 40 hours of deliberation spread across 4 days. They found him guilty on 18 of the 36 counts, involving 8 of the 13 victims. The convictions included 4 counts of first-degree rape, 1 count of second-degree rape, 6 counts of sexual battery, 4 counts of forcible oral sodomy, and 3 counts of procuring lewd exhibition. He was acquitted on the other 18 counts. When the guilty verdicts were read, Holtzclaw broke down. He sobbed, rocked back and forth in his chair, and put his head on the defense table. As he was led from the courtroom, he turned to the jury and appeared to mouth the words, "I didn't do it." Outside the courthouse, protesters sang an ironic rendition of Happy Birthday. The jury recommended a total sentence of 263 years in prison. On January 21, 2016, District Judge Timothy Henderson formally imposed the sentence, ordering the terms to run consecutively. It was a de facto life sentence. District Attorney David Prater said afterward that Holtzclaw was not a law enforcement officer who committed crimes. He was a rapist who masqueraded as a law enforcement officer. Janie Liggins, the grandmother who had filed the original report, spoke publicly after both the verdict and the sentencing. She told reporters she had been traumatized, had entered therapy, and had suffered a stroke as a result of what happened to her. She said Holtzclaw picked the wrong lady to stop that night. Another victim, Shandegrion Sade Hill, told reporters she had been handcuffed to a hospital bed when Holtzclaw assaulted her. She said she was speechless and scared. Holtzclaw has maintained his innocence. His family created a website to support his appeals. On August 1, 2019, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals upheld both his convictions and his sentence. His attorneys then petitioned the United States Supreme Court, arguing that combining 13 separate cases into one trial was unfair. On March 9, 2020, the Supreme Court refused to hear the case. He is currently held under an alias at an undisclosed Oklahoma state prison, a common practice for former law enforcement officers in the prison system. The Associated Press highlighted Holtzclaw's case in a year-long investigation into sexual misconduct by law enforcement officers across the country. That investigation found that roughly 1,000 officers lost their licenses over a 6-year period for sex crimes or other sexual misconduct, and that the real number was likely much higher because not every state tracks or reports such cases. 13 women came forward against Daniel Holtzclaw. All of them were black. Most of them were poor. Several had the kind of backgrounds that made people less likely to believe them. Holtzclaw knew that. He counted on it. He chose them specifically because he believed no one would listen to them. And for months, he was right. It took a 57-year-old grandmother driving home from a game of dominoes, a woman with no record, no warrants, and no reason to be afraid of a traffic stop, to break the silence that Holtzclaw had built his crimes around. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Moving on to the final case of the video, case number 5. Roger Caleb Rogerson was born on January 3, 1941, in Sydney, Australia. He was one of 3 children. His father, Owen Rogerson, was a boilermaker who had immigrated from Kingston upon Hull, England. His mother, Mabel Boxley, had immigrated from Cardiff, Wales. The family lived in Bondi before moving to the suburb of Bankstown when Roger was 6 years old. He attended Bankstown Central School and later Homebush Boys High School. In January 1958, at the age of 17, he joined the New South Wales Police Cadet Service. By the time he turned 18, he was a full member of the New South Wales Police Force. For the first 2 decades, Rogerson's career looked like a success story. He rose quickly through the ranks and became a detective. He was assigned to the Armed Hold-Up Squad, a unit famous for having both the most effective and the most notorious detectives in the state. Between 1974 and 1978, Rogerson was present during multiple shootings involving suspects. He was present when officers shot and killed bank robber Philip Weston. He was present when police shot dead a man trying to rob a bank courier. He was at Rose Bay when officers killed bank robber Gordon Thomas. He worked on some of the biggest criminal cases in Australia during the 1970s, including the investigation into the Whiskey Au Go Go nightclub fire in Brisbane in 1973. Over the course of his career, Rogerson received at least 13 commendations for bravery and outstanding police work. In 1980, he received the Peter Mitchell Award, the highest annual award in the New South Wales Police Force, for arresting an escaped armed robber. He was considered one of the most decorated officers the force had ever produced. But behind that record, Roger Rogerson was operating as something else entirely. He had formed close relationships with some of the most dangerous criminals in Sydney's underworld. Among them was Arthur Neddy Smith, a convicted heroin dealer, rapist, and armed robber. Smith later claimed that Rogerson had given him the green light to commit crimes in New South Wales, meaning Rogerson provided protection while Smith operated freely. Rogerson was also connected to Abe Saffron, the organised crime boss who controlled much of the nightclub industry in Sydney's King's Cross, and Christopher Dale Flannery, a Melbourne-based hitman known as Mr. Rent-A-Kill. In 1988, Rogerson admitted to a journalist that he and other detectives had fabricated evidence in the Whiskey Au Go Go nightclub fire investigation. They did it, he said, because they believed the suspects were guilty, but lacked sufficient evidence to prove it. On June 27, 1981, Rogerson shot and killed 22-year-old Warren Lanfranchi, a small-time heroin dealer, in the back during an encounter in a laneway in the Sydney suburb of Chippendale. Rogerson claimed that Lanfranchi had pulled a gun and that he fired 5 shots in self-defence. An inquest cleared Rogerson of wrongdoing, but the jury declined to find that he had shot Lanfranchi in the course of duty or in self-defence. Lanfranchi's girlfriend, a woman named Sally Ann Huckstep, went on national television and publicly accused Rogerson of murdering her boyfriend. In 1986, Huckstep was found strangled and drowned in a pond in Sydney's Centennial Park. Convicted criminal Neddy Smith was charged with her murder, but was acquitted in 1999. In 1984, undercover drug squad detective Michael Drury was shot twice through the kitchen window of his home while he was feeding his 3-year-old daughter. Drury survived and accused Rogerson of orchestrating the hit because Drury had refused a bribe in exchange for tampering with evidence in a heroin trafficking case. Rogerson was charged, and a drug dealer named Alan Williams testified that he and hitman Christopher Dale Flannery had agreed to murder Drury for $50,000 each. In 1989, Rogerson was acquitted. Flannery, the alleged triggerman, had already disappeared in May 1985. He has never been found. Rogerson was widely suspected of involvement in Flannery's disappearance, but no charges were ever filed. Rogerson was dismissed from the New South Wales Police Force on April 11, 1986. He had been suspended from active service since November 1984. The reason for his dismissal was depositing $110,000 into bank accounts under false names. He was later convicted of conspiring to pervert the course of justice in connection with the money and served approximately 3 years in prison in the early 1990s. It was his first time behind bars. In 2005, he was jailed again for 12 months, after admitting he had lied to the Police Integrity Commission during a 1999 hearing about possible corruption at Liverpool City Council. After leaving the force, Rogerson developed a second career as something of a celebrity criminal. He worked in the building and construction industry supplying scaffolding, but he also became an entertainer, performing in a spoken-word stage show called The Wild Colonial Psychos alongside criminal Mark Chopper Reed and former Australian rules footballer Mark Jacko Jackson. He told stories about his police career to paying audiences. He wrote a memoir called The Dark Side in 2009, in which he portrayed himself as a tough but effective crime fighter and rejected the corruption allegations as politically motivated attacks. His life was depicted in the 1995 television miniseries Blue Murder, in which actor Richard Roxburgh played Rogerson. A 2017 sequel covered his later crimes. Through it all, Rogerson maintained a charismatic, larger-than-life persona. People who met him described him as charming, funny, and impossible to dislike. Former detective Duncan McNabb, who knew him, later put it bluntly, he was corrupt and a killer. By 2014, Rogerson was 73 years old. He was drinking buddies and fishing partners with another former New South Wales detective named Glenn McNamara, who was 57. McNamara had retired from the force years earlier and had been working as a private investigator and true crime writer. The two men hatched a plan to buy 2.78 kilograms of methamphetamine, the drug commonly known as ice, from a 20-year-old University of Technology Sydney student named Jamie Gow. The drugs had an estimated street value of $19 million. Gow was a young man trying to climb the ranks of an Asian crime syndicate. He had boasted to friends about an upcoming massive deal with someone called Glenn. On May 19, 2014, the day before the murder, CCTV cameras captured McNamara meeting with Gow at the Meridian Hotel in Hurstville, Sydney. That same day, McNamara removed his aluminium boat from dry dock and towed it into the basement garage of his apartment building in Cronulla. On May 20, 2014, at around 1 p.m, Rogerson and McNamara visited a rent-a-space storage unit facility in Padstow, a suburb in southwestern Sydney. They were captured on CCTV, testing the roller door of Unit 803 several times. They then left and returned with Gow at around 2 p.m. The CCTV footage showed McNamara entering the storage unit with Gow, who was carrying what prosecutors said were the drugs. 3 minutes later, Rogerson walked into the unit. Approximately 20 to 30 minutes later, the two former detectives emerged from the unit dragging a silver Ocean and Earth surfboard bag that was visibly heavy. They loaded it into the back of a white Ford Falcon station wagon, a car they had purchased together on April 27th. Jamie Gow was inside that bag. He had been shot twice in the chest at close range. He was 20 years old. That afternoon, the two men drove to a Kennard's hire store at Tarrant Point, where they purchased a 2-ton chain block. They returned to McNamara's apartment in Cronulla and, according to prosecutors, transferred Gow's body from the car to McNamara's boat in the basement garage. The next morning, footage showed the boat leaving with an object wrapped in a blue tarp visible inside. The men took the boat approximately 2.5 kilometres off Shelley Beach and dumped the body at sea. They then went to the Crown Hotel in Revesby and shared beers with a group of friends. On May 24th, police secretly seized McNamara's station wagon from the garage beneath his apartment. Inside the car, they found 2.78 kilograms of ice stuffed into a green backpack under the seats. On May 25th, McNamara was arrested and charged with murder and supplying drugs. The following day, May 26th, a fisherman found Gow's body floating in the water off Cronulla. He was still zipped inside the surfboard bag and wrapped in a blue tarp. His white Lacoste shoes were poking out of the bag. A single latex glove remained on one of his hands. A thick chain had been placed around the body, but it was not heavy enough to keep it submerged. On May 27th, Rogerson was arrested. Both men pleaded not guilty. Their first trial began in July 2015, but was aborted on the second day after McNamara's barrister made a prejudicial comment about Rogerson having killed people while a police officer. A retrial began on February 1, 2016. During the trial, each man blamed the other. McNamara testified that Rogerson shot Gow and then threatened to kill McNamara and his daughters if he did not help dispose of the body. Rogerson claimed he was not present for the killing and said McNamara told him Gow had shot himself during a struggle. A forensic expert testified that gunshot residue was found on the clothes Rogerson was wearing that day. McNamara's clothes came back clean. On June 15, 2016, after 6.5 days of deliberation, the jury of 7 men and 5 women found both men guilty of murder and of supplying a large commercial quantity of a prohibited drug. On September 2, 2016, Justice Jeffrey Bellew sentenced both Rogerson and McNamara to life in prison. They each received an additional 9 years for the drug supply charge. The Gao family released a statement saying that 2 very dangerous criminals had been found guilty, but that true justice could never really be served. They said Jamie was a young man who had made mistakes, but that no 20-year-old deserved to lose his life over a stupid mistake. In 2021, both men lost bids in the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal to have their convictions overturned. The panel of judges said Rogerson's case did not raise any doubt about his guilt. On March 17, 2023, the High Court of Australia rejected Rogerson's final bid to have his life sentence overturned. Rogerson spent his final months in the aged care unit at Long Bay Correctional Centre. He was diagnosed with amyloidosis, dementia, and multiple other chronic conditions. On January 18, 2024, prison staff found him drowsy, confused, and unable to feed himself. He was transferred to the Prince of Wales Hospital in Sydney, where doctors discovered a large brain hemorrhage. He was placed on end-of-life care. Roger Rogerson died on January 21, 2024, at the age of 83. He had spent the last decade of his life behind bars for the murder of a 20-year-old university student over a bag of drugs. Crime writer Andrew Rule, who met Rogerson multiple times, told the Australian Broadcasting Corporation that Rogerson's greatest mistake was thinking he was frozen in time. He came up in an era when New South Wales police could do virtually anything they wanted. Times changed. Rogerson did not. He walked into a storage unit in 2014, apparently forgetting that security cameras existed on every corner. The most decorated detective in the history of the New South Wales police force, a man who had spent decades outsmarting investigations, dodging charges, and walking free from courtrooms, was undone by a CCTV camera and a surfboard bag that would not stay underwater. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.